It was April 2017 in Tepetitlan, a small town in the Mexican state of Jalisco. Like so many places across the Catholic world, the community was gathering for one of the most solemn days of the year, Good Friday. Good Friday is not an ordinary date on the Christian calendar. It is the day believers recall the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, his suffering, his death on the cross. The day is marked by silence, by prayer, by the heavy weight of remembrance. That afternoon, the bells rang across Tepetitlan, calling the faithful to Mass. Families entered the parish church quietly, children clutching rosaries, parents holding them close. The altar glowed with candles, the scent of incense filled the air, and in the center stood a large crucifix. The figure of Christ, carved in wood, bore every detail of his passion: the crown of thorns, the outstretched arms, the face turned downward in sorrow. For decades it had stood unmoving, a silent witness to countless prayers. The Mass began. Scripture was read, hymns echoed, and the congregation bowed their heads in reverence. Then, in a moment that would spread far beyond the walls of this small church, something happened. The head of the crucifix moved. Slowly, almost deliberately, it lowered forward as though Christ himself was bowing to the people gathered below. Here is the original witness video taken that day. At first, many thought they were imagining it. Eyes darted upward. Whispers rippled across the pews. Then came the gasps, the cries, the sudden sound of knees hitting the floor. What they saw was impossible. A statue carved of wood, showing the gesture of life. A parishioner with his phone raised managed to capture the moment on video. Within hours, the footage was racing across social media. The clip showed the unmistakable dip of Christ's head. Clear, visible, real. For the faithful in Tepetitlan, it was more than video evidence. It was a sign. On Good Friday, of all days, Jesus had bowed his head once again. They described chills running down their arms, tears streaming from their eyes, an overwhelming sense that heaven had broken through earth for just a moment. One woman later told reporters, "I felt as though Christ was alive. When his head lowered, I knew he was with us in that moment, listening to our prayers." Another described trembling for the rest of the service, convinced that God had touched their small town in a powerful way. But not everyone agreed. As the video spread, so did debate. Skeptics pointed out the age of the crucifix. The head, they argued, was held by a rope or cord. Over time, those supports loosen. Add the weight of the wood, the heavy air inside a packed church, or the natural shift of the building during a crowded liturgy, and perhaps the head simply slipped. The parish priest himself leaned toward this explanation. Sometimes air, pressure, or time can cause movement. It is not necessarily supernatural. Yet even he admitted the timing was striking. Out of every day in the year, why then? Why during Good Friday Mass, in front of a full congregation, at the exact moment when Christ's death was being remembered? For the faithful, coincidence felt too small an answer, and the symbolism could not be ignored. In Christian tradition, to bow the head is a gesture of humility, reverence, or acknowledgement. Theologians often say that God can use ordinary things to stir extraordinary faith. Some insisted the movement looked too natural, too lifelike to be an accident. Others said faith should not depend on statues moving, but on the eternal truth of the gospel. Now this next case is even more stunning. If the bowed head of Christ in Tepetitlan stirred awe, What happened in Saltillo 1 year earlier left people utterly shaken. Saltillo is a historic city in northern Mexico, with deep Catholic roots and grand old churches. In 2016, inside one of these churches, a statue of Christ became the center of a mystery that would ripple far beyond its walls. It was an ordinary day of worship. Parishioners prayed, candles flickered, and sunlight filtered through stained glass, painting the walls in colors of blue and gold. Nothing suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. Among those present was a man with a camera. He was simply filming the altar and its surroundings, capturing the quiet beauty of the service. His lens panned across the sanctuary, pausing for a moment on a statue of Jesus Christ. The statue itself was nothing extraordinary, life-sized, carved with the familiar features of Christ. Eyes cast downward, face solemn, mouth closed in silence. For years, it had stood still, drawing reverence but never attention. But then, as the camera lingered, something happened that would send chills across the internet. The eyes of the statue opened. At first, it was subtle, the faintest shift of eyelids. Then unmistakable. The dark pupils became visible, the gaze no longer painted stone, but seemingly alive. Let's take a look at the original video.
Santa María, Madre de Dios, ruega por nosotros pecadores, ahora y en la hora de nuestra muerte. Amén. Dios te salve María.
In the footage, you can hear a slight gasp, the sound of disbelief. He steadied his hand and kept filming. The statue's gaze seemed to lock onto him, holding his attention with unnerving intensity. When the video was shared, people around the world watched in shock. Thousands of viewers claimed they saw the eyes blink, open and close. Others insisted the mouth moved as well, almost as if whispering a word. For many, it was more than eerie. It was overwhelming. Some described feeling their skin crawl. Others said they couldn't finish the video. A number of viewers, especially those of faith, said they were brought to tears, convinced that Christ had truly looked at them through the screen. The reaction in Saltillo was immediate. Crowds gathered to see the statue in person. Pilgrims arrived from nearby towns, curious to stand before the figure that had opened its eyes. The atmosphere around the church became electric, half awe, half fear. Skeptics, of course, were quick to respond. Was it a trick of lighting? Could shifting sunlight or flickering candles have created the illusion of movement? Some argued that the video might have been digitally edited, that clever effects could easily create the impression of blinking eyes. But even those explanations didn't convince everyone. Photographers and video analysts examined the clip frame by frame. Some concluded that the movement seemed too natural to be digital manipulation. The way the eyelids lowered and rose, the detail of the pupils shifting it had the rhythm of life, not illusion. The Catholic Church, as expected, approached the story with caution. No official declaration was made. The local diocese simply noted that such claims must be treated with care, and that faith does not depend on supernatural signs. But the silence only added fuel to the fire. For those who believed, the symbolism was profound. In Christian faith, the gaze of Christ is more than physical eyes. It is the belief that Jesus sees the soul, that nothing is hidden from his sight. To imagine the statue opening its eyes was to feel, even for a brief moment, that he was watching, acknowledging, and perhaps calling his people back to him. One woman interviewed outside the church said, with tears streaming down her face, "When I saw his eyes, I felt like he was looking right at me. Not at the camera, at me. Into my heart. I can never forget that look." Yet, beyond arguments of science or faith, something undeniable happened. People prayed. people reflected. The clip, whether genuine or not, pushed countless men and women to kneel, to ask for forgiveness, to feel that Christ was nearer than before. That is the paradox of stories like this. For those who saw the statue's eyes come alive, life did not continue the same way. Consider the man who filmed it. In an interview, he admitted he had not been a particularly devout Catholic. But after the experience, he found himself returning to church regularly. "I can't explain it," he said softly. "I just know that I saw something that changed me." The statue of Saltillo has since become a quiet symbol. The church still stands. The figure of Christ still gazes downward in solemn stillness. To most who visit, it looks unchanged. But for those who believe, it carries a memory. The day Christ opened his eyes and looked at his people. Some will always insist it was just shadows, camera tricks, or human imagination. Others will hold to their dying day that it was Christ himself, alive and present. But whatever the explanation, the power of that gaze cannot be erased. If Mexico gave the world crucifixes that bowed their heads and statues that opened their eyes, Spain offered another mystery, one that unfolded in the heart of Seville during Holy Week. Seville is famous for its Semana Santa, or Holy Week, processions. Every year, thousands line the cobbled streets as statues of Christ and the Virgin Mary are carried on great wooden platforms called pasos. The air is heavy with incense, candles flicker in the night, and solemn music echoes through narrow streets. It is a tradition centuries old, filled with beauty, reverence, and devotion. In 2019, during one of these processions, something happened that left the crowd stunned. At the center of the paso was a revered statue of Jesus Christ. He was depicted in his passion, crowned with thorns, his expression heavy with sorrow. The platform was lifted on the shoulders of dozens of men, known as costaleros, who carried the enormous weight through the winding streets of the city. Their steps were steady, their rhythm practiced. And yet, as the crowd watched and cameras recorded, the statue appeared to move. Not the whole body, not the arms or the torso, just the head. Slowly, gently, it tilted to the side, almost as though Christ were acknowledging the prayers of his people. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some pressed their hands to their mouths in shock. Others made the sign of the cross. The music continued. The carriers marched on, seemingly unaware. But the statue's head had shifted clear enough to be caught on multiple videos, unmistakable enough to spark worldwide debate. For the faithful in Seville, it was no accident. They believed Christ himself had bowed his head in blessing over the city. To them, it was a gesture of presence, of love, a reminder that even in his passion, Christ walks with his people. But skeptics quickly offered explanations. Perhaps the movement was caused by the paso itself, swaying slightly as the carriers walked. A shift in balance, a hidden joint in the statue. Even the vibrations of the music, all were suggested as possibilities. Some argued it was just the angle of the cameras, that what looked like a tilt was nothing more than perspective. Yet for those who stood on the streets that night, those explanations felt thin. They insisted they had seen the movement with their own eyes, that it was not imagination, not illusion. One man said later, "I have walked in these processions all my life. Never have I seen a statue tilt its head like that. It was as if he was answering us." And there was something about the timing that made the moment even more powerful. Holy Week is when Christians commemorate Christ's suffering and death. The processions are not just parades, they are acts of devotion, of carrying Christ through the heart of the city. To see his statue move during such a sacred time felt like a divine confirmation, as though Christ was acknowledging the devotion of his people. The videos went viral, as they always do. Millions replayed the clip, analyzing every frame. Some slowed it down, convinced the movement was real. Others scoffed, pointing to shadows and angles. The debate grew, but so did the fascination. For believers, no explanation was needed. The gesture of Christ tilting his head was a message, subtle yet powerful. It was not about physics, but about faith. To them, it was Christ showing that he was not distant, but present, not an idea, but alive. The symbolism was profound. A bowed head can mean acknowledgement, compassion, or sorrow shared. In Seville, many took it as Christ bowing in compassion for the prayers of the faithful, prayers carried in silence through candlelit streets. For them, the tilt was not just movement, it was meaning. The church, as in most cases, remained cautious. No official pronouncement was made, no declaration of miracle. But the people of Seville did not need an official word. They had seen something that touched their hearts, and that was enough. A young woman who had traveled from another region to watch the procession later said, "I came here because I wanted to feel close to God. When I saw his head move, I felt he was looking at us. I felt seen. I felt loved." That perhaps is what makes stories like this endure. Whether explained by mechanics or left as mystery, they draw people deeper into faith. They stir the imagination, awaken reverence, and leave behind memories that cannot be shaken. Because in the end, the question is not only, did it really happen? But what did it awaken in the people who saw it? And in Seville, on that Holy Week night, it awakened wonder. The Paso continued through the streets, the music played, the candles burned. To some, it was just another procession in a tradition centuries old. But to others, it was the night Christ bowed his head, not carved wood, not painted eyes, but Christ himself, alive in mystery. And that memory lingers still. 3 places, 3 different moments, and yet one thread ties them together: the mystery of statues that appear to come alive. In Tepetitlan, a crucifix lowered its head on Good Friday, the very day Christians remember Christ bowing his head in death. In Saltillo, the eyes of a statue opened, gazing with unnerving intensity, as though Christ himself were seeing into the souls of his people. And in Seville, during Holy Week, the head of a statue tilted gently, as if acknowledging the prayers rising from candlelit streets. Each event left witnesses shaken. Each event stirred debate, and each continues to echo in the hearts of those who believe they saw something more than wood, paint, or stone. But what do these stories mean? Skeptics argue. There are natural explanations for all of them. A rope loosening over time could cause a crucifix to move. Shifting light, flickering candles, or camera effects could make a statue's eyes appear to open. Vibrations from a procession or the swaying of a platform could tilt a statue's head. And the Catholic Church itself is cautious. The Church rarely declares such events miracles, knowing how often natural explanations are found. Faith, it insists, does not depend on moving statues. It depends on Christ himself. And yet try telling that to those who were there. To the woman in Tepetitlan who wept as the crucifix bowed. To the man in Saltillo who felt Christ's gaze pierce his soul. To the pilgrims in Seville who swore they saw Jesus nod in compassion. For them, these were not accidents. They were encounters. Faith does not always demand proof. Sometimes faith is stirred by mystery, by wonder, by the sense that heaven is closer than we imagine. Whether science explains it or not, what matters is the effect it leaves behind. Hearts that pray more fervently, lives that turn back to God, tears that fall not from fear, but from hope. Some ask, why would God choose to act through statues at all? Why not through visions or voices or signs written in the sky? Perhaps the answer is simple. Statues are meant to remind us of holy things. They are carved by human hands, but they point to realities beyond themselves. If at times they seem to move, it is not because the stone itself is alive, but because God uses what is familiar to reach the human heart. A bowed head becomes a reminder of Christ's humility. A gaze becomes a reminder that Christ sees us. A tilt becomes a reminder that Christ hears our prayers. In this way, the statues do not replace faith. They awaken it. The truth is, we may never know for sure what happened in those churches and streets. The videos can be studied, the statues inspected, the theories tested, and yet certainty may always slip through our fingers. But maybe that is the point. Faith lives in the space between certainty and doubt. Too much proof, and faith becomes unnecessary. Too little, and it becomes impossible. Miracles or mysteries live in that fragile space where the human heart must choose to believe or not to believe. For some, these events are illusions. For others, they are miracles. For all, they are mysteries. So now, the question comes to you. If you had been there in Tepetitlan, in Saltillo, or in Seville, what would you have believed? Would you have seen wood and rope, shadows and vibrations? Or would you have seen Christ, alive in mystery, reaching out to remind his people that he is near? No camera, no theory, no explanation can answer that for you. Only your heart can. For 2,000 years, Christians have proclaimed a faith built not on statues, but on a living God. And yet, through the centuries, God has often used simple signs to draw his people closer. Bread and wine become the Eucharist. Water becomes baptism. A cross becomes salvation. And sometimes, a statue moves not to prove anything, but to awaken wonder. Whether you call them miracles or illusions, the truth remains. In a world grown cold with doubt, moments of mystery still have the power to stir hearts. They remind us that faith is not just about what we see with our eyes, but what we dare to believe with our souls. In the end, perhaps it does not matter whether the crucifix bowed by accident, or the eyes opened by trick of light, or the head tilted by vibration. What matters is the response, the prayers, the tears, the faith renewed. Because miracles are not always about stone coming to life. Sometimes, the greatest miracle is the human heart turning back to God. And so the stories remain. In Tepetitlan, in Saltillo, in Seville. 3 places, 3 mysteries, 3 reminders that faith and doubt walk side by side. And in between them lies the question each of us must face. When the statue seems to move, will you see only wood and shadow, or will you see Christ himself, alive in mystery, bowing his head toward you?